Let's fix our insulin resistance. Insulin resistance can happen to anyone, and it can be chronic or it can be temporary. It can be due mainly to lifestyle factors or hormonal disorders or genetic conditions. Insulin resistance is at the center of prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, but people living with type 1 diabetes can also develop significant insulin resistance. But we're not doomed. The good news is that with consistent lifestyle changes, some may experience changes to their insulin resistance in as little as weeks or months. In this video, I'll give you 4 simple things that you can do every day to start fixing your insulin resistance. We'll also talk a little bit about what is insulin resistance really, and how do you know if you're insulin resistant, and why do we care about it? And as a bonus, I'll also add in something that you can do a little bit more long-term to permanently fix your insulin resistance. Let's dive in. I'm Christelle from Diabetes Strong, and I've been living with type 1 diabetes since 1997, and I've gone through some periods of time with significant insulin resistance. And I can tell you that it's the absolute worst. So I do everything that I can to keep insulin resistance at bay, including these 4 things that I do every day. And the first thing that I do to keep insulin resistance at bay, and I really hope you'll join me in this, that is to move. I'm kind of nervous starting this video out by talking about moving more, because I know for a lot of people, just the sound of that sounds exhausting. But please don't stop the video. Hang in there, and I'll show you some different ways that you can incorporate more movement and maybe even make it a little bit of fun, but incorporating more movement into your day. In order to understand why adding more movement into your day could be an easy way of reversing insulin resistance, it's probably beneficial that we first understand, well, what is insulin resistance? Very simplified, it's when your body isn't really that good at using the insulin that it produces, or if you live with insulin-dependent diabetes like I do, that you inject. When you eat, doesn't really matter what you eat, it gets broken down and gets converted into glucose that then goes into your bloodstream. Insulin acts like a key. It's the key that allows that glucose to be moved out of your bloodstream. When you're insulin resistant, the cells in your liver, your fat, and your muscles don't respond well to those insulin keys and can easily take out glucose from your bloodstream. You can say that the keys don't work as well as they should, and this can lead to elevated blood sugar levels. When you move, and this can be as simple as going for a walk, you sharpen those keys and you make it possible for your body to more effectively move glucose out of your bloodstream. And movement, physical activity or exercise, whatever you choose to call it, is really effective. A single session of moderate exercise can increase insulin sensitivity up to 40%. And the effect can last 48 to 72 hours. Okay, let's be a little bit pessimistic and just say it's only 48 hours. But that also means that you can reduce your insulin resistance consistently if you just exercise every other day. The general recommendation for otherwise healthy adults is 150 minutes of moderate activity a week, or 75 minutes of intense exercise. That kind of sounds like a lot, but when we break it down, on average, that's 20 minutes of moderate exercise a day, or 10 minutes of intense exercise. Some examples of moderate exercise are brisk walking, vacuuming, or raking leaves. Just enough to get your heart rate up, but you should still be able to have a conversation. Did you notice how I did not mention going to the gym? I mean, I go to the gym several days a week. I love it, but my point here is that you do not have to go to the gym to incorporate enough activity in your everyday life to fix your insulin resistance. I also mentioned intense exercise. The word intense kind of gives it away, but it's a type of activity where your heart rate gets really elevated and it becomes kind of challenging to even have a conversation. Ideally, you'd want to do a combination of cardiovascular exercise such as walking, biking, dancing, or swimming, and resistance training, which is anything that puts your muscles under tension, such as bodyweight exercises using a resistance bands or weights. I think of these 2 types of exercise like this. So cardiovascular exercise is great for improving insulin sensitivity here and now. So it's a great tool to use after meals. And also just going for a walk after a meal seems to be really good for digestion. And resistance training is great for fighting insulin resistance permanently. And it's not just my observation. Studies back this up. So one way to keep it simple is to do 2 to 3 resistance training sessions a week. I usually do about an hour, but if you're just starting out, stick with 20 minutes. You can then also go for 10 to 20 minutes walks after dinner or after every meal if your life allows for that. It doesn't have to be complicated. It can even be walking in front of the TV if that's what you prefer. Now that we built up a sweat, the next thing that you can do every day to fix your insulin resistance is to manage your stress. Stress can be chronic or it can be situational. And one of those things that happens when we're stressed is that our body releases cortisol. So cortisol is a stress hormone. It's our fight or flight hormone. There's nothing inherently wrong with cortisol. It's something that we need, but it's one of those situations where too much of a good thing is definitely very bad. Because unfortunately, cortisol can make you more insulin resistant. Exactly what we're trying to fight here. I focus on lowering chronic stress. A lot of things can lead to chronic stress, but I also think a lot of these things are not really things that we can do anything about. So don't worry, I'm not going to tell you to just quit your job. Then you're just going to be stressing about not having a job, right? So let's just assume that you have eliminated or reduced anything that you can eliminate or reduce to get your stress levels down, but you're still stuck in a chronic stress rut. Then what do you do? My preferred ways to reduce stress is through exercise or by doing breathing exercises. And will you just look at that? Exercise just came in handy once again. Exercise can boost your feel-good endorphins and distract you from your daily worries. I really see exercise as a fix-all, or at least as a almost fix-all. I saw it described as meditation in motion, which is one of the most accurate descriptions I think I've seen. I kind of wish I'd come up with that. But regular exercise can also increase self-confidence, improve your mood, help you relax, and lower symptoms of mild depression and anxiety. Are you convinced yet? A more relaxed way to combat stress is through meditation, yoga, or breathing exercises. I'm a big fan of nasal breathing. I know that sounds kind of funky, but it's really effective. Let me show you. So, this is what we can do. And then in. You want to take your right ring finger, put that on your left nostril. Let go with your thumb, and you want to exhale through that right nostril. Inhale. Putting that left finger on the right nostril, letting go with the ring finger, exhaling through your left nostril. And just repeat that, breathing through each nostril. I often use this exercise at night. It's a good way of winding down and, let's say, turn off the brain. And that leads us to the third thing that we can do every day to fix our insulin resistance, and that is to improve our sleep quality. And of course, exercise can also help improve your sleep, as sleep can often be disrupted by stress, depression, and anxiety. Lack of sleep can impact your metabolic markers and cause insulin resistance. Again, meaning your body isn't as effective as it can be at using the insulin you either produce or inject. And that can ultimately lead to higher blood sugar levels. Lack of quality sleep really hits me hard. It's really been something I've had to work hard on fixing, and I'm still a work in progress. Whenever I have nights with too little sleep or poor quality sleep, I have to fight a lot harder the day after to keep my blood sugars in range. Most people should aim for 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep a night. But just closing your eyes and hoping for the best is not always going to cut it. But the good thing is there's a list of things that we should do and things that we should avoid that can help improve our sleep. I try to follow this bedtime checklist. I try to set a firm bedtime. This one is really hard for me, but I try. I make the bedroom dark. I've installed blackout curtains. I try not to bring my phone to bed. Also, that one is also hard for me. And I don't use my phone or the computer screen during the last hour before bed. And then I have a wind down ritual. I mean, you could do 5 minutes of yoga, relaxing music, take a hot shower, but for me, it's the nasal breathing exercises. So now we exercised, we managed our stress, and we got a good night's sleep. So before we move on to the fourth thing, the fourth easy thing that you can do to fix your insulin resistance, let's just talk about, well, how do you actually know if you're insulin resistant? Insulin resistance can be really hard to diagnose. If you already have a diabetes diagnosis, you might see that your blood sugars start to climb and it becomes harder and harder to keep your blood sugars in a healthy range. If you do not have a diabetes diagnosis, you might not know that you're insulin resistant until your body gets to a point where it can't produce enough insulin to keep up with the resistance and your blood sugars start to climb, as well as your A1C. But your doctor might look at your family history, at your medical history, do a physical exam, look at signs and symptoms, and look at your test results. Probably look at your lipids, your A1C, and your blood sugars. A1C is a blood test that tells you what your blood sugars have been on average over the about last 3 months. It's usually something that gets measured in your doctor's office, but there's also an at-home test that I really like. I find it to be very accurate, and it's just a neat way to measure my A1C at home. if it's going to be a while before I see my doctor, or if I want to check my A1C between appointments. All it requires is a small blood drop, and in 5 minutes, you have an A1C reading. I get the kit with 4 tests on Amazon for around $65, so that's about $16 a test. I'll leave a link to that down in my video description if you're interested. Next, let's talk about how what you eat can make you more insulin resistant. And of course, what you can do to fix it. Because what you choose to eat can also be the reason why you're developing insulin resistance. This doesn't mean that you can only eat salads for the rest of your life, but making some meaningful changes to your diet can really have a huge impact. If your diet predominantly consists of highly processed foods, you can cut that down somewhat. You can replace some meals with less processed foods. So think more vegetables, fruits, and grains. It's recommended that you predominantly eat non-starchy vegetables. Here's a huge list. If you think of your plate, the ADA, so the American Diabetes Association, recommends that about half of the plate is filled with non-starchy vegetables. A quarter of your plate should be filled with lean proteins and plant-based protein sources. And then the last quarter of your plate should be filled with quality carbohydrates, such as starchy vegetables, whole grains, and fruits. Some of that can come from processed food sources. Not all processed foods are bad for you. Just because it comes out of a can or it's frozen doesn't mean it's bad for you. But you just have to be aware that a lot of these canned or frozen foods have a lot of added things such as salt, sugars, and fats. So it's a really good idea to look at the nutrition label and then look at the ingredients list. So you'll see all the ingredients listed, and it's listed based on what you'll find the most of in the product. So the first thing that's listed is going to be what's most of in that product. Check out this bag of macadamia nuts. It's one of my favorite snacks. As you can see, the first ingredients is macadamia nuts. They even list that 98% is macadamia nuts and the remaining 2% is salt. Makes sense, as these are salted macadamia nuts. But I think it could be a little overwhelming for most when it comes to nutrition guidance. And it's super easy to say just don't eat processed foods, but you know what? Not everyone has that luxury. The way I think about it is, yes, we should try and pick non-processed foods whenever we can. But when we can't, I go for the processed foods with the fewest added ingredients. So for example, frozen beans. Well, if there's just beans in there, in my book, that's just as good of a choice as the fresh beans. But I would generally stay away from ultra-processed foods, such as fast foods, soft and sugary drinks, and processed meats, as much as possible, as they've been shown to be bad for our waistlines and for our insulin sensitivity. I like to cook most of my food, but I don't have the time or energy to cook big meals every day. So my approach is that I cook big batches of food and I then either freeze them, or if it's just for a few days, I store it in the fridge. I'll, for example, cook enough chicken for 3 to 5 days and just store that in the fridge. For lunch, I often eat a big salad and I'll just grab some of the chicken, throw on there to have some lean protein. Another thing I like to cook in batches is chili. I'll often choose a low-fat minced beef or sometimes minced turkey. I'll throw that in a big pot with some onions, with some kidney beans, tomatoes, and a lot of spices, and I'll just let that simmer for a few hours. I'll then pack it up in portion sizes and freeze it. That way I always have a healthy dinner in the freezer and just pull out and reheat. Those were only 2 examples, but I think there are a lot of ways to making it easy to eat home-cooked meals. And as I mentioned, I don't think all canned or frozen foods are bad. For example, I'm a big fan of canned tuna in water. It's really lean protein, fairly inexpensive, and it goes great with those lunch salads. And those were 4 easy things that you could do every day to reduce your insulin resistance. But I also promise you a, let's say, more long-term project, and that relates to body weight. If you're carrying around a bit of excessive weight, your insulin resistance could improve if you reduce your overall body fat, as excess body fats blunt your body's sensitivity to insulin. Even losing and maintaining a 10-pound weight loss can make a difference. I know this seems super generalized, but a waist measurement of 40 inches or more for men and people assigned male at birth, and 35 inches or more for women and people assigned female at birth, is linked to insulin resistance. Studies have shown that belly fat makes hormones and other substances that could contribute to long-term inflammation in the body. This inflammation may play a role in insulin resistance. High level, to lose weight, to drop your body fat, you have to consume fewer calories than you burn, and you can achieve that through adjustments to your diet and your activity level. Fixing your insulin resistance is only part of the puzzle. If your A1C has already started to climb, there are still things that you can do. Check out this video with 19 things that you can do to lower your A1C. And while you do that, why not subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications? That way, you'll never miss a thing. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.